Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling the Science of Identity Foundation, SIF for short, and its connections to, well, let's just say, a certain someone who's been in the political spotlight, Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating one, that's for sure. We've got leaked letters from inside SIF itself, court documents, news articles, you name it, even some juicy bits from social media.
We're talking about a group with a very specific, kind of rigid structure, a leader who seems to command serious devotion bordering on, I don't know, maybe obsession. And their history, well, it bumps right into politics in some pretty unexpected ways.
Definitely unexpected.
Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to figure out how SIF operates, what their leader, Chris Butler, is all about, and just what is Tulsi Gabbard's real relationship to this organization.
Sounds like a plan.
And, just to set the tone, I got to hear this quote from one of the leaked high letters. It's from Butler himself, talking about a family in SIF who own a store. Get this. Why don't they give it to DTE, a-holes, and they call themselves my disciples, making all kinds of money while their kids skate and surf? Assholes, they should give it to me.
Wow. Okay, so right off the bat, we see Butler's not exactly Mr. Nice Guy. That's pretty aggressive, to say the least.
Yeah, a little intense. Definitely makes you wonder about the kind of influence he has over his followers. So let's back up a sec. For our listeners who might not be totally familiar, who is this Chris Butler, and what exactly is the Science of Identity Foundation?
So Chris Butler, he also goes by Jagadguru Siddheswarapananda Paramahamsa, kind of a mouthful.
Yeah, a bit of a mouthful.
He started out as a Hare Krishna devotee, but then he went and formed SIF, claiming this was the real path to Krishna. And they're structured like a pyramid, with levels. At the very top, you've got the pure devotees, Butler and his wife, Wailana. Then below them are senior disciples, then regular disciples, then it goes down to students and new people.
And it sounds like Butler keeps a tight leash on those lower down, the SIF totem pole, right? I mean, we've got all these letters talking about him demanding money, putting disciples on blast, even dictating who marries who and who gets divorced. That's a whole lot of control.
No kidding. And that control spills over into their whole lifestyle, too. SIF's all about strict vegetarianism, homeschooling is the norm, and forget about modern medicine.
Definitely seems like there's this intent to, keep members in a bubble, shut off from the outside world.
Absolutely. Reinforces Butler's authority, no question. And I gotta share this anecdote. It's almost funny, in a dark sort of way. A disciple once bought Butler a lei, those Hawaiian flower necklaces, but used SIF money for it. And Butler completely lost it, screaming at them with this incredibly, well, let's just say, colorful expletive.
Yeah, I read about that. What an overreaction, right? Come on.
It's just one example, but there are tons more in the source material. You get a sense of the kind of, reverence, maybe even fear that surrounds Butler within SIF. And this is key because, you see, SIF isn't just about spirituality. They've got political ambitions, too.
Oh, really? Now, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Well, Butler was convinced that one of his followers was destined to be president of the United States. In fact, back in the 70s, they even formed a political party called Independence for Godly Government. Didn't last long, but still, it shows they wanted to get their hands dirty in politics.
And that's where the Gabbards come in.
You got it.
Tulsi Gabbard, the former congresswoman, and, she ran for president, and her whole family, they're deeply involved in SIF.
Deeply. Her father, Mike Gabbard, he goes by Krishna Kartha Das in SIF, was a Hawaii state senator. Her mother, Carol, or Devaruti Dasi, she was on the Hawaiian Board of Education. And Tulsi herself, in a video from 2015, she straight up calls Butler her guru dev, which is a big deal, a sign of huge respect in Hinduism.
Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture here. We've got this strong, maybe even domineering personality leading a very tightly controlled group with political goals. And then you add in this prominent family, the Gabbards, who are woven into the fabric of SIF.
You could say that. It makes you wonder how far SIF's influence really reaches.
No kidding. It's definitely intriguing, to say the least.
To say the least. And we can't talk about influence without talking about money. SIF's got some financial connections that raise, some eyebrows.
Like what? Spill the beans.
So there's this vegetarian grocery chain in Hawaii, down to earth, pretty popular place. Turns out SIF has deep ties to it through its parent company, Healthies, Inc.
So is this just S members supporting a business that fits their beliefs? Or is there more to it?
Oh, there's more, trust me. A 2012 SF tax return shows they made a whopping 96% of their profit from selling Healthy's Inc. stock. And back in 2004, they reported a donation of Healthy shares worth over $929,000.
So it's not just about buying groceries. There's some serious financial entanglement going on.
Entanglement is a good word.
Okay, so this financial picture is getting more complicated. And then we have this other character, Joseph Bismarck. Who is he, and how does he fit into all this?
Joseph Bismarck. Now, he's a longtime devotee of Butler, the managing director of a company called the QI Group. But here's the kicker. He co-owns QNet, and QNet is, well, let's just say it's had its fair share of controversy.
Controversy. Lay it on me.
QNet, it's a multi-level marketing company, and it's been accused of, shall we say, some shady practices, like potentially operating as a pyramid scheme.
Hold on, a pyramid scheme. That's illegal, right?
In a lot of places, yeah.
So what kind of legal trouble are we talking about here?
I mean, they've faced investigations and lawsuits in multiple countries, including India. The authorities there have really cracked down on them, accusing them of unfair trade practices and basically ripping off consumers.
So we've got a spiritual guru, a politically active group, a grocery chain, and now a multi-level marketing company, potentially mixed up in illegal stuff. It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It is, but we're just getting started. And we can't forget about the people who've actually lived this, the former SAF members. Their stories are vital if we want to really understand what goes on inside this organization.
Absolutely, their perspectives are essential. So what have former members said about their experiences?
There are two former members who have been pretty vocal online, Ian Koviak and Rama Ranson. They've shared their stories, raised concerns about SEF's practices, and Butler's holdover people.
And our sources mention other ex-members too, folks who haven't gone public with their names, but who went to SIF schools. And some of what they describe is disturbing, to say the least.
Yeah, there are allegations that some of Butler's lectures, which were played to kids at these schools, included really graphic sexual content and homophobic stuff.
Wow, that's pretty messed up. It makes you wonder what kind of environment those kids were growing up in. And it brings us back to Tulsi Gabbard. Earlier you mentioned she publicly acknowledged Butler as her guru dev. Has she said anything else about her relationship with SIF, especially with all these allegations coming out?
It's interesting because it seems like how she talks about her religion has kind of shifted over time. At first, she avoided talking about Butler and SIF. But then later on, her bio starts emphasizing that she follows Gaudiya Vaishnavism. It's a more mainstream branch of Hinduism, more associated with the Hare Krishna movement.
So maybe she's trying to distance herself from SIF and align with a form of Hinduism that's more, I don't know, acceptable to the public.
It's possible, especially with all the controversy around SIF and Butler. This shift in her story, it adds another layer to the whole thing, makes her relationship with the group even more complicated.
We've covered a lot of ground here. We've got Butler, strong personality controlling his followers, SIF with its political aspirations and questionable financial ties, and disturbing stories from former members. And then there's Tulsi Gabbard, rising political star, deeply connected to it all. It's a lot to unpack.
It is, and it's a reminder that there are often layers beneath the surface. Things aren't always what they seem.
So how do we start making sense of this? Where do we go from here?
I think the first step is to keep asking questions. We need to look at the evidence, consider different viewpoints, and be willing to challenge what we think we know.
This all started with the question of Tulsi Gabbard's connection to SIF. Does it matter? Should we be concerned?
That's for each person to decide. But based on what we've uncovered, it's definitely a valid question. The idea that a group like SIF could influence politicians, especially those in powerful positions, well, that's not something we can just brush aside.
We've looked at how SIF is structured, what Chris Butler teaches, and how Tulsi Gabbard's relationship to the group seems to be changing. But there's one piece of this puzzle we need to dig into more: the financial connection between SIF and QNet.
Yeah, that's a big one. We know that Joseph Bismarck, who's super close to Butler and a major figure in SIF, also co-owns QNet, this multi-level marketing company that's facing some pretty serious accusations.
And those accusations involve QNet operating as a pyramid scheme, which, if it's true, is illegal in a lot of countries.
Right. Pyramid schemes, they prey on people who are looking for a quick buck, promising them wealth and freedom. The people who join early, they make money by recruiting more people, and those people recruit even more, creating this whole pyramid structure. But eventually, the whole thing collapses, and the people at the bottom, they lose everything.
So are we saying QNet could be funneling money to SIF?
We can't say for sure without a thorough investigation, but the links between Bismarck, QNet, and SIF, and the fact that QNet's under fire, it raises some red flags, no question. We need to follow the money trail, see if there's any evidence of wrongdoing.
This is starting to feel like a house of cards. A secretive religious group with political ambitions, a controversial multi-level marketing company, and questions about where the money's going. That's a recipe for trouble, don't you think?
It definitely raises concerns, especially when you consider how this might be affecting the people involved, people who are searching for spiritual meaning or a better financial future. And then you add Tulsi Gabbard to the mix, a political figure with close ties to it all, and it gets even more complicated.
So where does this leave Tulsi Gabbard? Knowing what we know now about SIF and these potential financial shenanigans, does her association with them raise questions about her judgment?
It's not for us to judge, but I think the information we've uncovered does raise some legitimate questions. Are there conflicts of interest? Is there undue influence happening? It's up to each individual to weigh the evidence and come to their own conclusions.
It's a tangled web we're dealing with here. It seems like every time we pull on one thread, another knot appears.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we need to keep digging, to keep asking those tough questions. We can't just take things at face value. We have to be critical thinkers, to be skeptical, and to be willing to challenge our own assumptions. It really is. And it highlights how crucial it is to be discerning, especially when you're looking at groups that can have a big impact on people. But we can't just focus on the organization. We got to talk about the individuals involved, especially those who've walked away from SIF.
Absolutely. Their stories can give us a whole different perspective on what SIF is really about.
Exactly. And, speaking of individuals, we haven't really dug into Joseph Bismarck's background yet. He's more than just a devotee of Butler's, right? He's got his own story.
Right, we mentioned he co-owns that company, QNet, and he's the managing director of QI Group. But fill us in on his history with SIF. It sounds like he's been connected to Butler for a long time.
Oh, yeah, for a long time. On his Google Plus page, way back when, he lists the Science of Identity University as his education. And in an interview from 2012, he talked about running away from home when he was only 9, ended up in this seminary type of school in the Philippines, lived as a vegetarian monk until he was 17.
Wow, so he's been living this lifestyle since he was a kid.
Pretty much. And a 2017 SI flyer even calls him a student of Jagad Guru, another name for Butler. So yeah, he's been deeply involved with SIF for decades. But what about those companies he's involved with, specifically QNet? It's not just any company, right?
Yeah, we touched on it earlier, but this is where things get a little, messy. We're talking about a multi-level marketing company that's been accused of being a full-blown pyramid scheme. And those accusations, they come with some serious legal baggage.
Oh yeah, for sure. QNet has been in hot water in several countries. India, for example, they really came down hard on them, accusing them of all sorts of shady stuff, like violating consumer protection laws and using unfair trade practices.
It sounds like QNet might be preying on vulnerable people, promising them riches, and then leaving them high and dry.
That's the classic pyramid scheme playbook. You get people to invest, promising them they'll make a fortune if they recruit more people. But the whole thing's a house of cards, designed to benefit those at the top while everyone else loses out.
So could QNet be funneling money to SIF?
It's a question worth asking for sure. We know Bismarck's a top figure in both QNet and SIF. And given the allegations against QNet, it's not unreasonable to wonder if there's a financial connection between the two.
Right, we need to follow the money trail, see if there's any evidence of, let's just say, less than ethical practices.
Exactly. But for now, we need to shift gears a bit. We've been talking a lot about the big picture, the organizations, the money. But let's not forget about the human element. We need to hear from the people who have been directly affected by SIF, the former members.
You're right. Their stories are crucial to understanding the impact of this group. What have they said about their experiences?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, there are some former members who have been very vocal in their criticism of SIF, like Ian Koviak and Rama Ranson. They've shared their stories online, talking about the control Butler exerted and the problems with SIF's practices.
And there are others who haven't publicly identified themselves, but who went to SIF schools and have shared some pretty troubling accounts.
Yeah, they allege that some of Butler's lectures, which were sometimes played for the kids at these schools, contained explicit sexual content and homophobic language.
That's really disturbing. It makes you question the environment those children were raised in and what kind of lasting impact it might have had on them.
Absolutely. And it all circles back to Tulsi Gabbard. She initially avoided discussing her ties to SIF and Butler, but later on she shifted her narrative, putting more emphasis on Gaudiya Vaishnavism, a more mainstream form of Hinduism. It's almost like she's trying to rebrand her religious identity.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if she's distancing herself from SIF because of all the controversy. Maybe she's trying to protect her political image.
It's a valid point. Politicians are always conscious of their image, and being associated with a controversial group like SIF could definitely be a liability.
So where does all of this leave Tulsi Gabbard? Knowing what we know now about SIF and those potentially shady financial dealings, does her connection to them raise concerns about her judgment?
It's a tough question, and it's not for us to judge. But I think the information we've uncovered does raise some legitimate concerns. We have to consider the possibility of conflicts of interest and undue influence. It's up to each individual to weigh the evidence and decide for themselves.
It's a complicated story, no doubt about it. And it keeps getting more complex the deeper we dig.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to be critical thinkers, to question everything, to look for evidence, and to be open to changing our minds as new information comes to light. It's a lot to process, right? We've been through a lot. We've got Butler, who seems to have a real knack for, well, let's say exerting his influence. SAF with its layers of control, the political ambitions, and those financial dealings that raise some serious red flags. And then we've got Tulsi, right in the middle of it all.
Yeah, it's definitely a story that makes you think, makes you question what's really going on behind the scenes, not just with SEF, but with any organization that holds a lot of sway over people's lives.
Absolutely. Transparency is key. People deserve to know what they're getting into, whether it's a spiritual group, a business venture, or anything in between. There needs to be accountability.
And how do we, as, average people, how do we ensure that accountability?
By being informed, by asking questions. Don't be afraid to dig a little deeper. Look into the structure of an organization. What are their motivations? How do they use their money? And most importantly, how do they treat their members?
It all comes back to those basic questions, right?
It does. We can't just take things at face value. We have to be critical thinkers to question what we see and hear.
We've laid out the facts as we found them, given you the pieces of the puzzle. Now, it's up to you, our listeners, to put those pieces together and decide what you think about SEF, about Tulsi Gabbard, and what it all means.
Exactly. Look at the evidence, weigh the different perspectives, and trust your gut. Does this information resonate with you? Does it align with your values?
We always encourage you to keep digging. Don't stop with what we've presented here. Explore the sources we've shared, find more information, form your own opinions, draw your own conclusions.
And remember, this isn't just about abstract concepts or organizations. This is about people. Real people whose lives have been touched by SEF. Their stories are the key to understanding the true impact of groups like this.
So as you continue to explore this topic, keep those individual experiences in mind. Think about the human cost, the hopes and dreams, the potential for harm.
The world can be a complex place. There are layers upon layers to every story. But if we approach it with curiosity, with critical thinking, with an open mind, we can start to peel back those layers and get closer to the truth.
And that's what it's all about, right? Seeking the truth wherever it may lead. Until next time, keep diving deep.